This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. I'm Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to be your journey on this host. Goodness me, I've done this how many times? I'm going to be your host on this journey of basket casey goodness. Talking about money today and joining me to talk about money is my brother and partner in basket casey goodness, Steve Connolly. Welcome, Steve.
Yay, free money. No, and I say that intentionally trying to mislead people. We're talking about grants, and that's funnily enough the hook that often gets people in, isn't it? That they think, oh, grants, free money.
Yep. Oh yeah, it's always good. But look, I like that. I like the fact that, get an audience, because the more people that understand that there's no such thing as a free lunch and that actually realize that grants they're never the backbone of an organization. Even if you are a fully funded charity, it's the service that you provide that is your backbone. The grant funding is just that's your vehicle for making money. And it's interesting because in that case, you still have to run a great business. You still have to manage the finances really well. You still have to provide a great service. So nothing really changes. But the focus today is probably more on sports grants. And really, I think that the focus of our narrative around this is never pay a grant writer again. Why would you spend money on grant writing? And I want to start by something, and I haven't told you this, but I want to start with something that bugs me, and I don't know if it bugs you. It's this concept of an organization getting a grant writer and then saying, oh no, the grant writers pay for themselves. Oh, okay, so how is that? Oh, well, their fees, the grant writers' fees, come out of the grant. Okay, well, how? Because the grant is project-based and it's public funds, and so they need to be acquitted for what's a community purpose, and paying a grant writer is typically not a community purpose. So how does that work anyway? Is that, am I the only one that's thinking we've got to get this right? And so if you're going to pay a grant writer, you need to have the money to pay the person to write your grant in the first place. And guess what? Whether the grant is successful or unsuccessful, you still have to pay them. And this is part of the reason why it's just sometimes awful work, because how many clubs, back in the days when we would help clubs with grants, how many clubs have not delegated the responsibility for writing grants to us? It was abdicating their responsibility for doing anything and just thinking, oh, Steve will get that. It'll be fine. Steve will be able to just manufacture stuff out of nothing. It's really difficult. Hence why the only grants that we do now are really, really big grants. And guess what? It's not the grants that get us the job. It's the planning that goes into getting the project right, so then the grant writes itself. And that's basically where we're going to go. It'll be a little bit of a different journey today, because why you never have to pay a grant writer again is my grant writer's name is Claude. I've had another grant writer previously. His name was Chatty, and he got fired because he kept writing like a grade 9 English student with bad grammar. Then I was using my other employee named Jemmy, but she was also sacked because she kept forgetting things. She kept forgetting context. She was okay, but then Claude, beautiful writing style. Yes, his name is Claude Anthropic.
Very subtle. Very subtle,
yeah.
As is your want and typical approach to all things basket casey goodness.
So subtle, like getting run over by a truck.
Yeah, that's right, or a freight train at a level crossing, yeah. So I ran a webinar recently with the City of Moreton Bay, one of our wonderful council clients here in Queensland, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to dig into the content which we covered in that session. So as you say, the world of grant writing has changed a lot in recent years, and full disclosure, we used to write heaps of grants, and now we don't, because it's not very fun. But exactly as you said, we have often been handed, for want of a better term, a bit of a poison chalice. A club will say, can you help us get this grant? And we would always run it, the club and the project, through a vetting process, which 20 years ago meant that we were only applying for eligible projects on behalf of eligible organisations. And that meant, more importantly than our grant writing prowess, that most applications we wrote were successful, because in the early to mid thousands, unless if you did a really, really bad job or your project or organisation wasn't eligible, there was a lot more money around and a lot less organisations applying. So the chances of success were far greater. So paying a grant writer back then made sense. Paying a grant writer today, when there is an abundance of AI tools available to support you in preparing really, really good grant applications just makes a whole lot less sense. So before we get too deep into the fun stuff though, it's, I think, always important just to cover off on a few myths about grants. And exactly as you said, we're really talking about grants that support projects. So things that we buy, things that we build, things that we do, projects that have got neat start and finish dates. There are very clear parameters around them so that we can look back and identify whether our project was a success or not. And did we do it on time? Did we do it within budget? Did we do what we promised the grant provider we would do? We're not talking about operational grants that some funded organisations might receive from government to deliver essentially a service that the government has deemed is critical, necessary, or, you know, an extension of what the government itself does. But we're talking about, like you say, predominantly grants that are applied for by sport and other community organisations, so halls managers, and you know, in many cases, local level not-for-profit organisations. But one of the other challenges that we often come up against is this mindset of dependence and, you know, organisations that are purely voluntary run. So the world owes us something, you know, all levels of government owe us money because of the wonderful work that our volunteers commit tirelessly for no remuneration. And the reality, as we've pointed to probably several times in this podcast in the past, is that you're one of many. Your organisation, in the eyes of a funding provider, is not unique. We understand how wonderful you are and the awesome work that you do, but if you're in a position where you want your grant application to stand out from the crowd, then you need to maybe do things differently from how you've done them historically. And particularly, we're now talking to those groups who don't do the project planning first, but they're just led down the garden path chasing the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's a couple of analogies for you in quick succession. You know, that concept of a grant being shared with you, whether that's through some syndication tool that feeds you grant opportunities into your inbox, whether that's your local sport and recreation or community development officer at your council, whether that's a person from your governing body who's in a position that's designed to support affiliated organisations and the volunteers who run them. That grant opportunity that presents itself and you think, great, okay, so here's an opportunity to get some money. What project can we manufacture to tap into that money? Which is completely, you know, us about in terms of the way that we advocate organisations should be thinking about the projects that are going to best, well, firstly, work out who you are as an organisation. Why do you exist? What's your purpose? This is where the importance of strategic planning comes in. And I think that this is probably something that we're going to dig into, as you mentioned a moment ago in this discussion. But getting really clear on who you are as an organisation, why you were established in the first place, what's so wonderful about your organisation that you still exist today, and then proceeding to identify the projects that are most likely to help you deliver on that purpose. Because if you go inventing projects just to secure grant money, there's a very good chance in our many years of combined experience that you're probably going to make up projects that don't actually align with your core business, that are going to be more of a distraction from your core business than actually supporting you to deliver on your purpose itself.
I call it the what can we get syndrome. Here's the grant, what can we get? There's a place in North Queensland, for those not familiar with Queensland geography, called Innisfail. And I love driving into Innisfail because there's a sign there that says green like you've never seen. Now, the reason it's green like you've never seen is Innisfail and Tully typically fight the communities of Innisfail and Tully typically fight each year for which community had the most rainfall. In a part of the world where you measure rainfall not in millimetres like we do everywhere else, but in metres. So it's very green. I was running a grant session up there many moons ago, and it was in the Conservatorium Theatre. So I felt right at home on a stage in a place that has lots of musical performances, though I was probably a bit more theatrical than I would normally. No, I was just as theatrical as I normally am.
I'm glad that you stopped yourself because I was going to do it for you.
Anyway, early on in the program, I said, when I run these sessions, people come up to me and say, Michael, have you got a list of grants? Because we want to see what we can get. I'm not going to do that. I don't have a list of grants. I can get one. And by the way, when I go and this was before some of the grant searches that you mentioned were available, I said I can go and Google where can I get grants, or I can go the Queensland government. I think it was a Queensland government gig as well. They have a grants system, and so any Queensland government grants you can very easily find. As soon as they're updated, that portal's going to be updated. I don't want to have to go and update something that is updated anyway. So I said, I'm not going to, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to help you plan a project to then get the right grant for your project. So I'm not going to give you a grants list. Even if I had one, I still wouldn't give it to you because it makes you go about it the wrong way. You start by looking down at the grants list and you stop being creative and you stop thinking, what do we need? And then even if there's a grant program for change rooms to increase female participation in typically male dominated sports, cool. But you're still going to design your project by digging into the guidelines and seeing, oh, there's $600,000 available here for projects up to $800,000, and you're going to develop your project up to $800,000 and not think, what do we actually need? Because what you actually need might be a $1.5 million project. But you're then limiting yourself. So anyway, it was fascinating because I'm down the front afterwards, when people drift away and you end up talking to people afterwards. I had about 7 people from the local pony club talking. They were fascinated with it. So digging into their project. We weren't digging into grants, we were digging into their project, and they were aligning the project with then how they would tell that story in the grant application. And a guy moseyed down the stairs of the auditorium, and I could see him kind of hovering there waiting to get my attention. So I said, I think his name was Bruce. Do you need something, Bruce? He said, yeah. Can I just grab that grants list that you said you had? It was and then you should have seen the look on the faces of every one of the pony club people. They've just gone,
oh, Bruce.
It was a classic. It was really funny. The concept of what can we get or what can we get syndrome is so counterproductive because you're developing a project to fit a grant rather than saying, what does our community need? And there's another thing that I want to touch on here because I've been saying what you need, what you need, what you need. And this was another thing where my opinion has changed. So can you believe it that sometimes I've had strong opinions on things, Steve?
I think all of our listeners will be very surprised to hear this.
But it's the concept of want versus need. And my narrative it used to be very clear on what you want and what you need, because you might say, to be able to play football next year, we need a lighting upgrade. And I'd say, what? Is the sun not going to come out next year? Because what you need to play football is something to kick, somewhere to kick it, and someone to kick it with. That's what you need to play football. You don't need 11 people per team and a properly manicured field and corner post flags and a clubhouse and grandstands and all of those things are nice to have embellishments. So I would say they're all wants. And I would say focus on the needs and meet your need really clearly. But I've 100% gone back on that. And I'm saying if you want something, push for what you want, because wants are where real growth happens. Because all of the clubs that are saying this is what we need, this is what we need, they're settling for just providing for what they're doing now. So it's in the circumstances and living in the confines of the box where we operate now. But what about the future? What about growth? What about opening up endless possibilities by saying, but what if? What if we had something? What if we had the ability to attract more coaches? So what are the limiting factors? And what if we didn't have those limiting factors? We've only got one field. Okay, well, what if we had 7 fields? And is that something that we want to push? And back to your point, which is critical, are we the sort of club that needs 7 fields or that wants or could probably activate 7 fields? Or are we better off creating partnerships because we're really clear on what we want and who we want to be? So if we are a club that is looking to play in the top league, then, okay, what do we need to do that? And do we want to do that? So the wants and needs things, go with it. Don't be limited. If anyone tells you, even if young Michael you go back in time and he says, no, focus on your needs, not your wants. Kick him in the shins politely, tell him I said you can, and then give him a ride in your time machine so he can go back and buy Apple shares in 1984. But make sure that you understand what you want, because that's where the really exciting stuff happens.
And again, I think this ties in really nicely with what you said about not being limited in your thinking by the available grant funding, and ensuring that when you're having these discussions about what the future of your organisation looks like, have those discussions in the context of a meaningful, consultative, and supported strategic planning process.
Yes.
And when I say supported, I mean get people like us, no, better than that, get us to come and assist you to write your strategic plan. Because again, increasingly, as grant programs attract more applicants and have less money to dish out, you've got to stand out from the crowd. And to stand out from the crowd, it's going to be harder and harder to do that just through the way that you construct your application, for reasons which will become clear when we start talking about AI. So you need to be able to demonstrate that the identification of this project for which you're seeking grant funding has actually occurred through that consultative process, the meaningful engagement, not just of your current committee, but of your broader membership base, external stakeholders like council, governing bodies, partners, sponsors, other organisations with which you're partnering to do the great job of delivering your services. That's how you've identified the need for this project. And when you do that, especially with the help of AI, the grant will bloody write itself. The hard work of building the plane as we're flying it, as you alluded to earlier, that we've done so often in supporting organisations to prepare a competitive grant application where they say, yeah, look, we know exactly what we're going to do, how much it's going to cost, we've got the scope mapped out. And then once we get our hands on it, we realise that there is but a semblance of a thought bubble for that
Not
project.
even a sketch on the back of a coaster in a pub. Nothing.
Well, wouldn't that be good if we had a sketch?
Yeah. So I want to just hark back to Hark, the Herald Angels singing, back to, it's not Christmas time, it's okay. Back to what I said about abdication versus delegation. Yep. We've been on the receiving end of this, but it doesn't have to be an external grant writer. So I don't want you ever to pay a grant writer ever again, because you can do it yourself. If you choose to get somebody else to do it, fine, but make the decision understanding that you don't have to. So we'll come back to that. But so what happened to us is people would then just assume that we can magically pull plans and costings and need statements and consultation outcomes out of, I'll be nice and say, out of thin air. Like we don't have that stuff. And it's not something that you can manufacture to a meaningful extent at 11 o'clock at night when the grant closes at 11:59 that night. And even if you've abdicated, a committee has abdicated its accountability for getting the project right to some schmuck internally that they've just called their grant writer as a volunteer, they can't do it either. So don't just abdicate and say, oh, it's all done. Macca's taking care of that. And I use Macca because he's the one who says Grant Writer is a dude, Grant Writer. It's like Knight Rider, but his name's Grant. So if you're going to do a grant, work on the project first. Don't just abdicate. And the other reason why a lot of people come to us and say, hey, can you write you've ran that great grant session and you did that great grants podcast. Can you write our grant for us? The answer is no.
Can we have that list of grants?
List of grants. The main reason the answer is no is, well, like you said, because that happens all the time. But I'm, like we've said often, I want to die empty. I want to die with nothing left in the tank and no secrets. So we're sharing all of this here so that you feel empowered to be able to do it. Mm. But in a world where now grant programs are developed by AI, guidelines are developed by AI, everyone putting their applications together is feeding the guidelines, the application form into AI and producing an AI-driven grant application, which when you do that, by the way, without checking it, and this happens all the time, you and I were joking earlier about people leaving in the prompts or the ChatGPT header. Oh, great. Thanks for the update. Here's the updated thing that you can, and they leave it in because they don't even
you can copy and paste it straight into your application form.
Yeah. And they leave it in there. And it's like if you're not prepared to put in the effort to write it properly and proof it, why would I read it? And grant assessors are going to be doing this. And by the way, then they're going to have AI assess the applications against a rubric that was created by and then used by AI. So the critical thing here is, in a world where everybody is using AI, most people using it really badly, how do you set yourself apart? How do you differentiate in a noisy landscape? And you nailed it, Steve, when you said it's your plan. Because you don't do a plan just for the grant either. So yes, you need to have a plan to support your grant applications, and that's really important. And it can be the trigger that gets some people to say, oh, okay, we'll do this plan. You'll get value out of the plan whether the grant is successful or not. You won't get value out of a grant application for which you've paid Mr. Writer, grant writer, to write your application if it's unsuccessful. So invest where you're going to get value out of it. And by going through the process of properly consulting with your community, understanding what sort of club we are, what sort of club we want to be, and then actively working in that direction, you will become a more successful business. And guess what? Government, grant providing agencies that are government, love to back a winner just like any punter in the TAB. If you are the winner, if you are going to create results, that makes you a low risk application. That makes you much more likely to get the grant, ironically.
And similarly, if any grant assessor or any funding provider can see that the need for your project has been really well established through that planning process, again, that very strongly supports the likelihood that that project is going to A, be delivered, and B, have a meaningful impact. Just quickly before we move on to the AI stuff more specifically, and we don't need to dwell on it too much, but I just want to talk through some of the ways that we advocate organizations should be using AI. So some of the steps in the process that they should be using an AI large language model to support them in fulfilling. And we say use one or more AI tools as a member or members of your team, rather than the slave that you expect to just do all of your hard work for you. And that's when people fall into that trap of copying and pasting the prompt or the little
the green
icon
tick emojis.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the emojis and icon bullet points that are so obviously
This is
AI.
not just any project, semicolon. It's more than that. N dash. Like, we don't write like that.
The hyperbole and the really extreme language. But just quickly before we move on to that, which, because we're very excited to do so, we're both tending towards, I think a really easy way for people to codify or understand where in the overall picture of your project planning you should see grants is that grants should help you deliver projects which are really important to your organization. And they should be projects that you are actually planning to deliver regardless of whether you get that grant or not. So we say that grants are a great way to help your organization deliver those priority projects bigger, better, or sooner. So if you don't get the grant, you might need to scale the project down. You might need to delay its delivery until you can save more of your own money to do that thing, or build or buy that thing. But it should be the case that the projects for which you're seeking grant funding are actually in close alignment with why you exist and what you strive to deliver as an organization by way of services. So I think that that's a really simple way for people to wrap their head around how important the project planning is. And I can firsthand very confidently say that if you're in that position, whether you're using an AI tool to help with the grant writing process or not, the actual preparation of the application is a whole lot easier if you've got an understanding of what the project is, why you're doing it, and what benefits are going to flow from that project. The application will essentially write itself.
Yeah, benefits, not features. So it's going to deliver X number of change rooms, X number of pedestals, X number of showers, X number of square meters. But why? You're not trying to achieve more dunnies and more showers. You're trying to achieve increased participation. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And tell the story of how the thing that you're going to build, buy, or do is going to deliver on those outcomes.
Yeah, and can we just quickly go back to something that you said a moment ago, when I think you rightly pointed out that a lot of grant applications, a lot of grant programs are essentially being built by AI tools, and people who are writing guidelines now are not writing all of those words that appear in the guidelines, but we're calling on AI tools to assist with that process. But one thing you said was that everyone's taking those guidelines, the application form, and maybe some other information and loading it into one or more AI tools. And I think that we're actually still in a position where a lot of people are not doing that, particularly those people who might be a little AI averse, the people who are a little concerned about AI taking over the world, and they've watched Terminator or one of the many installments a little too many times. And look, the reality is that we do need to exercise caution when we're using these tools. We might maybe close out the discussion on that shortly, but once we've had a bit of a chat about how you can make use of these tools. But I think that for me, it's becoming clearer that those people who are using AI tools in a really effective way are preparing kick-ass applications that tick all of the boxes, they meet the criteria, they assess that rubric, and in some cases, in fact, I've never supported anyone, I've never applied for a grant myself for which there either wasn't guidelines, or B, if there are guidelines, the guidelines didn't set out the criteria. It is a universal truth that guidelines make no secrets of what they're looking for through that grant program. They will tell you the assessment criteria, and they'll tell you in some cases even where to focus your efforts in responding to the application questions, because they'll be weighted criteria.
Notwithstanding that grants are political.
No.
And they are. And I've often stood in front of a room taking the piss out of government for, in the backroom shenanigans where they're looking at who they're going to fund because of the votes that they need to get.
Absolutely.
That happens. It's going to keep happening. Play the game. Like, accept that that's going to happen. Look, you can go and get into politics and fight that. You can take them to whatever crime and misconduct commission or whatever ombudsman you want. But how do you create an application that stands out because you've got a project that stands out?
And use that reality of grants being political to your advantage. And if you're not well connected with your local, state, federal elected representatives, become well connected, because
their opponents.
And their opponents, absolutely. Good point. Yep. So play them off against one another, off against each other, and tap into that political opportunity which absolutely exists in this realm.
It does, but to temper that, government does still look for projects that are going to achieve community outcomes. And like you say, those community outcomes, the benefits that the grant program is trying to achieve, are usually, if not always, well articulated in the guidelines.
And politicians are typically in the same business that our not-for-profits are in, building better communities. So tap into that. And if they don't know about you, if they don't know about your projects, then they can't support you. They can't advocate behind closed doors or publicly. So change that tomorrow if your organisation is not well connected with your local, state and federal members of parliament or elected representatives. So just quickly, I'm conscious that because we've probably still got a reasonable number of our listeners who might not know exactly what we're talking about when we say AI and large language models, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, we're talking about these types of artificial intelligence that have essentially been trained to understand and generate human language. So these tools are not intelligent in the human sense of the word. They are tools that
artificially intelligent? We could be onto something here, Steve.
Open the dictionary and let it be known from the Basket Case Bros that this shall henceforth be the definition of artificial intelligence. But they're tools that have been designed to interpret and to construct human language and based on what is the likely next best character or word to follow the last one that it created. Now, because of that reality, it makes mistakes, and we do need to be very upfront about that.
Before we get into that, I just want to back up a little bit and address the fact that not only do some people not really understand AI still, there are some people who are still scared of it. So the way that I start this conversation in rooms and it's often longer term volunteers who therefore are a bit older and who have been doing things a certain way, and hence why they might still be running a paper-based accounting system. So let's hook artificial intelligence and the LLMs, the large language model, into something that we're familiar with. I first started using Microsoft Word in, I'm going to say 1991 or 1992. So Windows 3.11, I think, and Microsoft Word. Now, what I loved about Microsoft Word was it was the first time that I could just type, and I was a good typer at school. I did touch typing in grade 8. I won the typing award, and I thought, I'm going to need to know how to type. So I'm so glad that I did, because I'm quite fast at it. But it was the first time that I'd be able to just tap an assignment out on a computer, and my spelling was terrible. I spell phonetically. Phonetically, phonetically. That's how I spell. What a stupid word. Like phonetically, and we make it non-phonetic. Bloody English language. It's terrible. But it was the first time that I didn't need mum to say, "Oh, Mickey Michael, you've got your spelling wrong again. Neighbours is not spelt Nabors." And because it would then go little red squiggly line. And then I would hover over it or right click on it and it would say, "Do you mean this word?" And this is exactly the same as the way that the large language models work. They look at the context of that word and they say, "Oh, Michael's had his dodgy spelling again. He probably means neighbours and he's got it set to British English spelling or Australian English spelling. So I'll suggest Neighbors." And then I go, "Yes, I accept that." And it's exactly the same when I'm tapping out a text message or anything on my phone and it tries to predict what I'm going to say next. It's just probability. When Microsoft Word was doing that in the early 90s, it was trained on Microsoft Word's dictionary. And so it's just looking through the dictionary that was on, at that stage, a DVD-ROM. A CD-ROM even. Oh, no, in those days, I think it was still 3.5-inch floppy disks, which were rigid for some reason. Anyway, it was...
The inside was floppy.
The inside when you broke them. Yeah. This stupid thing.
Trust me, I know.
Bloody Microsoft. Oh, yeah. Oh, I remember having to load up DOS each time. Anyway, that's showing my age now.
Ask us why we use apples.
Sorry, Bill. Anyway, so it was trained on what was on those floppy disks or eventually that CD and eventually that DVD. So it would then say, this is probably the word he's looking for because it's the closest one I can see in the context that he's doing. And it didn't even really use context. The LLMs are just doing exactly the same thing, but instead of being trained on a 3.5-inch floppy or 6 3.5-inch floppies, it's trained on the internet. So everything that has been written is now ingested into the AI, and it's saying, "Oh, he probably is thinking this. This is probably," and that's all that it's doing. Probably the best next, not even the best next word, but the next best token, which is a letter or a character or a couple of characters, a QU, for instance. That's probably the best next thing. And it just does it and does it again and does it again based on the context and based on your prompt. The shift between when ChatGPT burst onto the scenes in late 2022 and now is the writing has become far better. And right now, like I've mentioned the tools and you mentioned them as well, but the best one in the market for writing grants, unfortunately, is not static. Because right now, I would say based on the outcomes that I'm getting, Claude is giving me the best writing outcomes. But tomorrow, there might be a new OpenAI tool or a new Perplexity tool, or maybe I'll manipulate Meta's Manus for writing some of these things instead, and it will give me a better outcome. But it shifts. What matters less than the model that you're using is that, and this is where I think the ethical use of AI really comes into its own, is use it ethically. Don't abdicate to AI. Like you said, Steve, treat AI as an integral member of your team and work collaboratively to create a great output that you are involved in. If you've got the great project to begin with, and you've got a great plan that spells out that project and it spells out your constituents and their needs and what they're looking for and how the project will achieve the outcomes, like you said, the grant will write itself, but it will be meaningful, it will be personalized, and it won't lead down a path, which I started telling the story earlier, where you say, "Oh, this is," and we tested this, and you'll remember when I tell this story, we tested this early that must have been 2023, and said, "Well, let's put this grant application through ChatGPT and see what he comes back with." And isn't it funny that we humanize them? I call him, and Gemmy, I call her. It's a Gemini, Google Gemini, and I call her Gemmy. And that's so weird. I don't know why I do it. It's just habit now. But we put this application in, and we put the project in, and it was for lights for an equestrian arena at a pony club. And well, to answer this question for the grant application, it said, "Yes, this project is going to enhance participation and delivery of sun-safe activities for riders, as well as better controlling the circadian rhythms of horses." We've just gone, I'm calling BS on that one, Chatty. It's a little far-fetched. But again, if you abdicate instead of delegate, that's the sort of crap that it might come back with. You have a responsibility for making sure that it's right and meaningful.
Yeah, the other, just quickly, trap that I've seen in a similar vein, lack of proofreading and discernment being exercised by the volunteer driving the AI tool and then copying that content into an application answer. The other problem I've seen is overcommitting clubs. So an AI tool essentially saying that the club can or will do certain things that the club has no capacity to do, and that being copied, without much discretion into the application and
then forming part of the contract with the grant agency. Well, no, you do have to do that now, because it seems like a good idea until you're actually delivering on it.
I was going to say this earlier, that actually writing the grant is the easy part. We've been saying this for a really long time, that the actual project delivery and acquittal because you've done everything you promised you'd do on time, within budget, and so on, as I was saying earlier, that's actually the hard part. So don't think that just securing the funding commitment is sort of where the hard work stops.
Drawing a picture of a house is easier than building a house. Same thing.
Yep. So let's just, based on my use of AI tools and supporting organizations through a mentoring capacity now rather than actually doing the writing, some of the ways that I've seen these tools used effectively in the grant application process start with getting a really deep understanding of the program. So as you said, loading the guidelines, the application form, the FAQs if they exist, into an AI tool, and to actually start to drill into what it is that funding program is seeking to support. So, prompts like, look at these guidelines and tell me the important things I need to know. What are the eligibility requirements? What's the assessment criteria? What do I need to attach? And anything else that you find. So let it do some thinking as well, thinking in bunny ears, that is. So it never ceases to fascinate me through the grant mastery course that we've been running for a few years, when through that course we support participants to prepare an application, and it culminates in them actually submitting a grant application for a real project to a real program. And we, through that process, get them to send us their draft answer wording. And it never ceases to amaze me how many of those first draft applications don't actually answer the questions that have been asked. And the person writing the draft has told the story that they want to tell, and they've got their, happy eyes on, where they're seeing the words in the question that they think they are seeing because they're the ones they want to see, and they go off on some tangent in responding to what they think is the question, and we review it and say, whoa, you haven't even answered the question here. So actually using an AI tool, or more than one, as members of your team to help discern exactly what it is that funding program is seeking to support, because through that process you might actually uncover that it's not the right program for your project or for your organization. And once these AI tools learn about your organization, they'll say, based on the nature of your organization, you're not a charity. This is a funding program for charities only. Don't waste any time. Don't spend any more time preparing an application. And people who, in the same way that they fail to, in many cases, read the application questions, they also don't read the guidelines. They also don't interrogate those assessment criteria when they're provided literally in black and white. So understanding the funding program, and then actually brainstorming how you can align your well-established project. So you upload a copy of your strategic plan, let the tool know what projects you seek to achieve over the coming 3 or 5 years or whatever other planning horizon, and why, and working then with the funding program to align your projects with the funding program's objectives. Not just being led down the garden path by the funding program, but actually tailoring it again to the projects in your strategic plan and within your plan for the future, because again, that funding program might not be well suited to any of those projects. And if you encourage the AI tool to be very critical of that alignment between your projects and the objectives or intended outcomes of that funding program, you might very well avoid wasting a huge amount of time writing an application that is very unlikely, if ever, going to be successful. Then when it comes time to writing your application, get some help. Give it some dot points. Say, we've got 250 words to answer this question. Help me by drafting it up. And one of the examples that I pointed to in the recent webinar that I mentioned earlier was to actually point out some very basic project information, but intentionally omit evidence and facts and data to support any of those claims. And I shared the details of that prompt in the webinar, and people were fascinated at, notwithstanding the lack of guidance that I gave it, how good the answer seemed to be. So then I saw some feedback, and people said, yeah, you look, this seems like a pretty good response. But then we progressed into a discussion about how we can actually make use of evidence and upload. For instance, many organizations have access to demographic, profiling systems, whether it's the ABS, whether it's third-party providers that take the ABS census data and turn it into, along with population estimates, some really comprehensive reports. Now, they're going to be, in some cases, hundreds of pages, those reports. You're not going to want to sit down and waste life by reading those documents. So again,
nor attaching the whole thing and expecting the grant assessor to find the 2 lines on page 78 that relate to your situation.
Which is just going to frustrate them and, increase the chances of you going in the NO pile. So upload that tool and say, now how can we improve this response by interrogate this data, interrogate this report, and tell me how I can tie our intended project outcomes with what is in this actual factual information.
Yep.
Actual factual. You like
nice. That? Hey, I want to just jump on to the concept of what we're actually talking about, because I think people are cottoning on. We're talking about large language models and how to interact with them. And for those people who haven't ever done it before and they say, can you teach me how to do it? I say, just do it. Here, boot it up and ask a question. And I remember doing this in early 2023 with mum and dad. And, I forget what we did, made a recipe for something that mum makes really well. And she was flabbergasted at how good the recipe was. And she thought, I never thought of, putting turmeric in that recipe. Like it would so work. But then I said, okay, now give me the same recipe, but in the style of a Bob Dylan song. Blew them away. Now make it in the style of a Shakespearean sonnet. Blew them away. And so then they started playing with it. But since then, I know that you and I have what I call an AI first mindset. So we don't abdicate. We say, how can AI make me get somewhere quicker or make me get further in the same amount of time? So how you begin is just begin. But all we're talking about here is literally scratching the surface. So for anyone who's concerned about how far you can go with AI, you can go much further than we're talking about here. So what we're talking about is booting up a tool like Claude Chat, like ChatGPT, like Gemini Chat, and just starting to have a conversation with a computer that feels like you're having a chat with a person. The language is very good. Where you can go, and the reason I'm telling you this is because I don't want you to think that this is where you need to go. Keep it simple. It's really easy for people to overcomplicate the use of AI, maybe too early. So if you are reading the news, hearing the news on Insta, following stuff on Facebook, you'll see that there are tools available that are going to blow your mind. So even just to go back to Anthropic's Claude, there's Claude Chat, but there's also a thing called Claude Code, where Claude can develop apps for you, whether that's an app that runs on your computer that does a specific task or an app that literally can run on your phone. It can code things for you that are bespoke for exactly what you want. You don't need to do that for a grant application. Claude Cowork can use tools on your computer to create documents. So ChatGPT on the web can't create you a Word document on your computer. It can give you a Word document now through back-end tools, but it can't create it on your computer. You can teach Claude Cowork, Perplexity Computer, Meta's Manus AI, OpenClaw, if you're prepared to get into you can go so deep with OpenClaw because it's open source and it will do anything that you want. But it's more than just chatting. It's now getting a computer to do something like you would train a person to do it. So I need you to go into my financial accounts and run my payroll for me, and then go into the bank and make payments. Like if you are brave enough / silly enough, you can train OpenClaw to do that, but it could expose everything to the web because it's open source and it will just do what you want. Like at least the paid systems have guardrails. So I'm telling you this to say it's a complex world. For what we're talking about here, it's a really simple world. And it's very similar to the prompts on my phone saying, is this the next word you want? Or the red squiggly underline in Microsoft Word. Just on steroids, where you can have a conversation. So keep it simple in your use of AI. Don't overcomplicate it, and don't try and do more than is necessary to get a grant application done. But what I love about what you've just talked through are the really practical applications of the prompts that you can use that are more than just write an answer to this question. It's what am I missing here? And coach me through it. And I love before actually asking for an output, and I was doing this with Claude earlier today. I said, coach me through what I was developing a standard operating procedure for a board position. Help me understand what I should be doing here. So here's the context, here's the information you need, where, and because it was Claude, I said, what access to my members only portals, for instance, do you need so that you can access some more information? And so that then it can create what I need. We just don't need to worry too much about that here. It's just let's have a chat, let's have a talk, but coach me through it first. So what am I missing? How should I best respond to this? What information should I gather that I might not have? Because it keeps you in the loop. It keeps the human in the loop, which is really important to keep it a human-centric and a human-driven output.
And then once you're done, once you've written your application, we've often advocated for getting someone outside your organization to proof the application. You know, that old trap that you fall into where you get someone else on the committee. Yep, someone too close to it who knows the organization, they know the project, and they're just looking at the words. Instead of now giving it to someone outside the organization, that someone can be one of these tools and say, here's the guidelines, here's my draft application, what am I missing? You know, make sure that the context for all the arguments that I've made makes sense. Where do I need to be looking for more evidence? Where are my arguments a little weak?
There's a caution around that, and this is kind of where you were starting to allude to the hallucination. The hallucination is where AI makes mistakes.
Yeah.
But it's in because you don't want to dial hallucination back to nothing because then the creativity goes down. But it's about walking the tightrope. But you've got to be really, really careful with the tool that you use because it can be a wonderful sycophantic friend and say, "Oh, Steve, that's the best question you could have asked me at this point in the delivery." And if you're saying, tell me where I could add more information, just by the nature of how I've asked that question, it's interpreting that I want it to give me more information. So it will give me more information because it wants to please me. It wants me to be happy because I'm the user. So it'll give me something. So you've got to be careful not to push too hard, but you've also got to be careful not to stop too early. So that's that fine line about, but it can be sycophantic on both ways. It can say, no, you're fine. Or actually, yes, you're right. You should add more information. But you can prompt it through that. You can say, don't just tell me what you think I want me to know. Be very specific in your instructions. I want you to critically assess this based on best practice grant writing in this sector or for this particular question. And then, and don't just agree with me, but don't give me more information if it's not going to add value to the quality of the output here. And just by putting that prompt somewhere in there in your discussion with AI, your output will be better and more objective.
And I think probably a nice way to wrap all of this up in a bow, and this is something that you alluded to just a moment ago, which is if you pay a bit of money for one of these tools, and we're talking a little bit of money, aren't we? We're talking 30 to 40 bucks a month tops, which seems like a lot of money, but compare that with what you might spend on a grant writer, and all of a sudden it seems like bloody.
And what you're asking for. How much money are you asking for? Even if you're doing a little grant application for a few grand and you're not prepared to kick the can for $34 to do it properly? Come on, guys. Like you and I have both talked about this in different contexts recently. Like spend the gosh darn money. Get in there and spend some money. Have some skin in the game. And the other really important thing is once you are paying, then you've got the option to go into the settings and select the little thing that says use my information to train this model. You don't necessarily want the things that you're sharing with AI. Not that they'd be directly exposed, but they can be indirectly exposed. So that because the model will use it to train itself and then say, oh, Michael used this information for his grant application. So now I'll share that with the world. And it might be quite specific, particularly if we're talking about a particularly sensitive sort of project. We don't want that. So pay the money, you've got those extra layers of security control, but you also get access to the full features. And it's those full features that are so helpful. But just get over yourself. If you're thinking, oh, we're not for profit, we can't pay, we've got to do it for free, pay the money. Like even if you then cancel your subscription after a month and it's cost you $36, but get over yourself. Pay the money.
Yeah.
Seriously.
And I think, that's exactly where I was going to go. And there's also then that important consideration, which I just touched really briefly on earlier, which is be careful of the things that you're loading into that system. If you are an advanced user and you are confidently loading private, sensitive, confidential information in there and you've interrogated the settings and you're happy to do that, great. But the vast majority of the users with whom we're talking now are probably not at that level. So uploading what is public information anyway, like your financial statements that go to your regulator after your AGM every year, no problem. Really, that stuff's publicly available anyway.
A manageable risk.
Yeah.
Like you don't upload a full membership database without redacting the names and private confidential information. Because even though it might not be used to train the model, it's still now data that's owned by Anthropic or OpenAI or Google. So yeah, don't do silly things like that. That's
probably enough.
Yeah, I reckon this is.
Otherwise, we're just going to talk well into the evening.
Yes. Look, I think they'd pay the money. And by the way, it's club money. And please, if anyone's got a problem with it, anyone on your committee says, "Oh, but we can't invest in that." Like, just point to the amount of money you're asking for in your grants, or the value of even if it's for assistance with some of the planning that you're doing. Like, what's the value of the projects that we're trying to do here for growth? What's the upside? The downside is $36 of club funds. Sure, that seems like a good investment. It is a good investment. And if anyone pushes back, throw us under the bus and put them in touch with me. Seriously, I'm very happy to have a rant on the phone to somebody who's not going to. I say that knowing full well that they're not going to ring. They'll go, "Oh, okay then." Plan the podcast. They can listen to it I was going to say they can listen to it on double speed. Do not listen to us on double speed. We speak fast enough as it is.
We'll sound like chipmunks.
Exactly what I was going to say. Steve, this is a fascinating discussion, and it's great. I know that the turnout for your webinar was really good, and this is a topic. What's that? 3 times in a week that you've been asked to do that topic. But there's an appetite for this information, and if this is the sort of thing that helps you A, write better grants, B, get more money, or C, be your first foray into this exciting world of AI so that you can start to say, "Oh, I get it a bit more now." Great. Any of those outcomes are great. So have fun with it, and tell them the Basket Case Bros sent you to do it. That's how you get it by your committee. Thanks, of course, to Jess, our wonderful producer and editor, for editing out all of the bits that don't make sense, which kind of makes it sound like these episodes might go for, take us 4 or 5 hours to record so that we get a few minutes of good stuff. If you're not already connected with us on social media, you can get us at CPR Group Oz and at NFP Michael, where there are daily doses of tidbits and useful information to help you in all things money, all things clubs. And remember, your club is a business. Don't run it like a business. Run it as the business that it is, and it will be more successful getting grants. You can get us at cprgroup.com.au. Steve, thank you again for joining me on this wonderful journey and leading this journey.
Thank you for having me, as always.
And we'll see you again next time.
See ya.
Bye. Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.